Welcome, and thanks for listening to Intrinsic Investigations. My name is Mr. Olivo, and I created this podcast because I've been fortunate enough over the last decade to see unique and thought-provoking projects happen in my classroom, and we wanted a place to showcase them. The true heart of this podcast lies not in the content discovered, but in exploring the personal stories of these young researchers as they journey through uncharted and unfamiliar intellectual terrain. By sharing their stories, we hope to normalize the challenges and frustrations that come with independent research, and also share those moments where students transcend the normal grind of the school day to discover concepts that range from the global to deeply personal. We will begin with a brief introduction to the student of focus, why they picked their topic, and discuss their growth over the course of the last year. It should be mentioned that the opinions expressed in this podcast in no way reflect the opinions of our school district, Bergen County Technical Schools and Special Services, or our school itself, Bergen County Technical High School, Teterboro, or the College Board. The work detailed in this podcast was most likely completed in AP Capstone, but this podcast is in no way affiliated with the College Board. It is now season 3, 2026, and for our first episode, we're going to be talking about love triangles. All right. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Katelyn, and I was working on the disposability of love triangles over this AP Research school year.
And why did you focus on love triangles?
So initially, I changed my topics 3 times, right at the beginning of the school year, and it was a long journey. So I was going to focus on AI romance, which was similar to Malia. And then I found out Malia was doing that, so I was like, I need to change my topic immediately. So I was watching TV, the show The Summer I Turned Pretty specifically, and I was thinking, I need a new topic. What can that new topic be? And I was watching the main character, Belly, interact with Benito. And then as I was watching the show, I saw that when Conrad came in, the attention was shifted from Benito, and now it was shifted to Conrad. And then I was like, wait, this can be a topic, because a lot of people talk about the disposability of these minority characters in love triangles. So I'm like, maybe I can focus on that.
So your work is not just on love triangles. I oversimplified it in the beginning, but you're getting into this other layer that's part of this, which is how does race or ethnicity manifest in love triangle dynamics on television shows?
Yeah. So a love triangle, what I found is that it's essentially like a hierarchy. There's always going to be 2 people paired up and then 1 person left alone in the love triangle. So I like to think of it like you're ranking these people to yourself. So
as the viewer?
As the viewer and as the protagonist. So
okay. In
the story, the protagonist is ranking their love interest options, and as a viewer you start to do that too, because you become the protagonist in the story when you're watching a film or a series. And in this, it's manifested in the real life that we see today. So if you constantly see characters that remind you of yourself being put down and never being chosen, it's going to make you feel as if you're not worth being chosen, which is something I found in my findings.
This, I think, is a good example of how a student can feel inspired by something that's pop culture related and then try to funnel it into something that's academic. So you just referenced The Summer I Turned Pretty, and that being the inspiration for why you wanted to go down this road. Mm-hmm. How did that impact your searching for peer-reviewed sources in the beginning of the process to then put a more academic spin on where you wanted to go and give you a structure for original research?
So honestly, at first it was very difficult finding peer-reviewed sources on this. I think I was just being very specific about it. I was just saying disposability of... I didn't focus on Hispanics initially, so I was just disposability of Black characters or Asian characters, and then I was just saying disposability of minorities. But I didn't think about the other archetypes that are within this, such as character dynamics and how you portray people on TV may impact how you see yourself. So then that impacted my search on sources, because it helped me find a more broader scope to look at, and it helped me have more findings on that. And then I did find one source that was exactly catered to what I needed. It was a source called, I'm not sure of the name exactly, I just remember that it was about Bridgerton, and it focused on Bridgerton and the love triangles and how that can change people's perceptions, and it was called like digital lynching. So I found that, and that was honestly perfect. I used it throughout my findings, but I think sometimes what you're looking for, you become a little too specific, and if you don't find exactly what your findings are, you feel as if they aren't worthy of being researched. But then eventually I found that I need to broaden my scope more and look at the different little aspects of things so that I have more sources to support my work.
All right. Were there particularly inspiring experts on this topic or papers that you came across where you thought to yourself, oh, I hadn't looked at it this way before. I didn't think of it this way before, but now I'm seeing where my work could fit in? Because I do notice in your paper, right away you establish a pretty clear gap. Mm-hmm. If you want to talk about that and how you use scholarly works to get there.
Yeah. So none of the scholarly works focused on love triangles specifically, like the disposability of characters in love triangles. So that was my initial view. I said that I wanted to look at the disposability of love triangles. So I think the gap was just already there. I never found any sources that discussed that explicitly, and I think that really did help me. And I also looked at books, because a lot of books do show like narrative archetypes. So what I also saw with the digital lynching source that I read, that was one that really stuck out to me, because I never viewed things that way. I always viewed things as, oh, this is a character that represents me, and oh, this is a sense of diversity that I'm getting in the show. And even in Bridgerton, I thought that they fitted characters perfectly and really helped it be a good source of representation. But then as I read that article, it helps me see the diverse ways of viewing one show that aren't exactly my view of the show.
Gotcha. Can you define digital lynching? What that is? Just for if someone is, I've never watched Bridgerton in my entire
Mm-hmm.
life, so I'm just trying to imagine where this fits into the show.
So the term digital lynching, that was one of the first sources I read, but I'm pretty sure what it means is that it makes one character seem way below the other ones, and just like makes the character to the white person's desire. So it's only on that white person's terms that these minority characters are doing things, and it like puts them down.
And that's going to tie to, and I could be wrong here, but I feel like that ties to one of the variables that you tried to measure, which was the IMDb rankings of the characters. We'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about your method. But if you had to sum up the objectives of your study in 1 minute, like what were you trying to do with your work after you came across these sources and you felt inspired by the shows that you were watching?
I think I would say my study was to see whether what I was seeing was actually apparent. So it was to see whether these Hispanic characters were actually being viewed constantly, or if they were being represented properly, and lastly, whether they were discarded of properly. So let's say like one of my variables was exit strategy. So if they exited and never were mentioned again, I wanted to see if that was a proper way of exiting these characters and what this exactly meant.
All right. And you started off with, you had very specific inclusion criteria for shows. So what did a show have to fit your research process? Like what did it need to have in terms of components, in terms of when it was made, to fit into your study?
So to fit into my study, the show, it could have started before the 2000s, but I had to look at the seasons. Let's say it was running for multiple years. So I would look at the seasons that were after the 2000s, since I mainly focus on the 21st century. And another criteria was that it had to be one Hispanic character and one white character fighting for the love of someone of a unspecified race. So they could be fighting for the love of someone Hispanic or someone white. It didn't matter. It just had to show the love triangle structure with a white person being compared to their Hispanic character.
So in that love triangle, there had to be a white character competing with a Hispanic character for the love of another white character, or is the race of
the race was
irrelevant, or
I didn't focus on the race of the person they were competing for, so it was like unspecified race.
Okay, all right. And from that, how many shows did you look at?
So I had a rapping coded strategy, and I also had a qualitative case study that I did on 2 shows. So I looked at 30 shows rapidly. So I just looked at like overall summaries, and like it was pretty much, I was spoiling the show for myself and seeing what was all about that. But then there were 2 shows. It was Riverdale and My Life with the Walter Boys, which I focus on specifically. And I did a whole qualitative analysis on those shows. And yeah.
All right. Is there anything that you found in that rapid coding that you feel like people should know around this question of Hispanic love interests and what you were aiming to look at?
So initially, I thought characters that were going to be very stereotypes would be more easy to exit. So I thought a lot of these characters that would exit the narrative would be the heavily stereotyped characters. And then while I was doing rapid coding, I found that even if the character wasn't heavily stereotyped, they would still exit often. So the majority of my findings, it allowed me to provide like a statistical number to put on things, because I feel as if once you put a number on something, it helps the impact be more real.
Okay. Exit strategies. What are those, and how are characters manifesting exit strategies on these shows?
So I had 3 exit strategies, I believe. One of them was killed off, one of them was rejected, and the other one was separated. I remember you said you were a little confused at first about separated versus like killed off, but then you found that killed off meant that they actually died. They were like gone from the narrative completely. They would never return because they died. And then separated/rejected means they were still in the narrative, but they were rejected by that character. And then I also had remains present, and that just meant that they stayed there. So they could have been separated or rejected while remaining in the narrative, which meant they were in the separated, rejected. But I put 3 numbers on that, so it was like 1, 2, 3. So it had like different numbers to it.
And why was that done? Why did you do the different numbers? Was it just category labeling? Or?
Yeah, it was just category labeling for myself.
So you have written off, which is just what they they're going to college in California now, and we live in New Jersey or something like that. Literally dying.
Yeah.
Somehow they're getting killed, and then they're rejected by the love interest, and because of that, they're not even on the show anymore. Is that pretty much it? Like they're not even a background character. They're just gone.
Yeah.
And then the last one, according to your paper, was they've remained present, which I guess would be the opposite of an exit. How often were Hispanic love interests being exited from the show versus persisting on the show?
It was very often, actually. It was like around 70% of the time, I believe it was, that they were exited in some sort of way. So most of the time they did exit. It was only when, like, for example, one of the shows I looked into was Jane the Virgin. So these 2 Hispanic characters, they ended up together. And it was only when they were the main, like, focus overall, that was when they remained present. So small chunk of my sample size did end up remaining present, and that was with my belief. Honestly, it followed my hypothesis that I initially had.
So it's about a 70-30 split. So 70%, I just want to make sure I'm hearing you right. So about 70% of the time, I think in your paper it was exactly like 67%.
Yeah.
Like 70% of the time, if there's a love triangle present, the Hispanic love interest is going to be exited versus being the ones to resolve that love triangle into a monogamous relationship.
Yeah.
Okay. How did that make you feel when you first identified that? Because I'm guessing what comes later with the examination of Veronica on Riverdale, that happens after you find this information, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you find this initial information, then we'll get deeper into the case studies you do. What was the initial reaction there?
The initial reaction is that it followed through with what I initially believed, honestly, because I did see that this was an issue and saw that they were constantly being discarded. So I initially believed that they would often be discarded. But what was different was that even if they had their own ambitions and their own goals, they were still rejected even then when they were at their best. And that didn't go with what I initially thought.
And you ran a chi-square test to test this idea.
Mm-hmm, I did.
And what did you find?
I found that it was statistically significant. I think my chi-squared score was a 0.2. I don't remember the numbers after that, but it was around 0.2, which shows that it is somewhat statistically significant, but not to the strength that I believed. Because if it was under, I think, 0.01, it would have been even more significant, which was interesting to me.
So it hit that 0.05 threshold in terms of your p-value. All right.
Yeah.
So then from there, you did this more quantitative work, but then you went a little bit deeper with two shows in particular. You looked at Veronica on Riverdale, which I've never watched, but when I was a kid, I guess Archie comics were a thing, so I'm vaguely familiar with what you're talking about, just because it was in the pop culture of the 80s somewhat. And then Jackie Howard from My Life with the Walter Boys.
Yeah.
So you looked at these two characters. You want to talk about what you saw when you dug a little bit deeper with your qualitative case studies of these characters and how they were portrayed?
Yeah.
You could do Veronica first or Jackie, whatever you want to do.
So Riverdale, that was a show. I was initially doing that for my pilot too, so I didn't think I would end up doing it for my actual qualitative case study, but I did end up doing it, but I only ended up doing season 1, which did limit me a bit because Riverdale has 7 seasons and I wanted to do rapid coding and I wanted to look at other shows, which is why I only focused on the first season, which did limit me, I would say. But now I did continue watching Riverdale, like just on
just for funsies?
Yeah,
okay.
Just on my own time,
okay.
Because I was left on a cliffhanger. But
that's how they get you.
Yeah, that's how they get me. But when I was just watching season 1, what I found was that Veronica and Archie did end up together, but it was only with Betty's blessing. So even then, she's still looking for the approval of the white character, which was something I noted in my paper. But I also looked into the rapid coding of this because I didn't get to watch the whole show. So I did search up like if they ended up together after the 7 seasons, and it showed that none of the characters ended up together when I searched it up. So I thought that was very interesting because I thought he would definitely end up with one person, and I also found that at one point they all had a relationship, which I thought was interesting to me. So I think that really flustered me in my findings because it was very different to what I expected. But I did write a lot about how Veronica was moderately stereotyped in the show, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. It shows some sense of her like Hispanic side. But what I did overall find was that in Riverdale, it somewhat represented my findings because it's still Veronica ending up with Archie with Betty's blessing, and she was seen as the disruptor in this narrative, which shows that Hispanic characters can be seen as like a disruptor when coming into something. And even in the first episode, they had Veronica coming in with some music that I would describe as like a little, how can I say it? It was like a little menacing, you know, like they had like menacing strings, like or like it's.
It just sounded dark and kind of ominous.
it was like a slow motion walk into the room. Like even before they knew her, she just walks in and she was like, this was when Betty was interested in Archie. So she was like disrupting them. And even when Betty was trying to shoot her shot with Archie, Veronica ended up kissing him, which makes her like seen as a quote unquote disruptor to their perfect narrative. And often Betty was described as like the girl next door who would have ended up with Archie, and a lot of people were surprised by that. And even at the end of the season, he was like, I really thought that I would be with Betty. So that was something I found interesting, that he didn't really value Veronica that much for their relationship.
Oh. So as an audience member now, you mentioned that you continue watching Riverdale because of the cliffhanger that you were left on. What are you, and you did just mention as well that some of what you expected to see, there were deviations from that, which is fine. And some of it confirmed what you saw. So and this happens all the time in research, you're not going to see what you initially thought you were going to see, because that would just be confirmation bias, and we got to be open to those things. But as an audience member now, when you watch shows that portray love triangles or love interests, and those characters are Hispanic, do you see yourself noticing things that I guess you're a little bit more critical of than compared before you watched that episode of The Summer I Turned Pretty at the beginning of the year?
I definitely do think I am much more critical of it. Now, subconsciously in my mind, I have my variables there, and I'm like when watching Riverdale, I had my Google Docs open and I would write, oh, this is a one moderate stereotype for this episode, or, oh, she stayed present in this episode. So I'm subconsciously there watching, and I'm like, oh, this is a moderate stereotype. Oh, she's kind of being disposed of here. And I think I catch myself doing that subconsciously now that I'm watching these shows.
Is that annoying, or are you okay with that? Sometimes students say this class just ruined, like they're just like, oh, now I'm just being overly critical of everything. But is that a net positive or a net negative? Is it a zero sum?
I think it increases my awareness of what's happening in the show, and it helps me like see what's happening more deeply and actually follow the plot more closely. I think watching shows for research has increased my attentiveness, but I also think it can get a bit annoying because you're just trying to enjoy a show, and sometimes you just want like a flat show that won't make you think a lot. But now I just think more deeply into these shows, which can be a good and a bad thing at the same time. Okay,
all right. So let's get a little bit into the difference here. So how did taking this course, or taking a research course, because we just kind of just touched on how it could make one think differently in a day-to-day setting. I even feel that way when people are just all the different projects in here, where I'm like reading Rotten Tomatoes comments now, and I'm thinking like, did these people actually watch the show? Or I'm looking at or my kids sometimes watch shows that are made earlier in the like 2000s and 90s, and I'm just like, okay, like here are zits, and that's how are zits portrayed in the show, because that was a topic that someone delved into. Or when I'm using AI and I'm talking to it about something, like what the emotional attachment looks like. So there's all these different topics happening in the class, and I find myself almost assuming the role of the researcher, like where I'm like, oh wow, how would I operationalize this? What would I do with that? But I try to keep it under control. So how does that compare to a regular class in terms of what you take with you in the day-to-day, in terms of thinking processes? Or you mentioned like your level of attentiveness is higher. How does that compare to just if you took a course where the curriculum was more or less planned out for you and is more content-based? What do you think?
I think research is very flexible. And as you said, we have a lot of diverse topics in this room. So now when I am looking at a show, I think of it as a research topic. I was like, before I was watching Dancing with the Stars, and when I was watching Dancing with the Stars, I saw it was like they kept being more lenient on one person, and I was like, oh, that can be a research topic because he was older, so they were more lenient. I was like, oh, that can be a research topic because they were treating him as like a child. And I thought of it as like, oh, that's like the infantilization of white men in like shows. And I'm like, oh, that's a research topic there. And now I think I just carry that with me everywhere, because I just look at different issues in the world and I'm like, how can I look into this, and how can this be turned into a research project? And now I also think it helped me look into a diverse set of topics. So for example, we have to look at other people's methods in our table. And I remember I had to look at Tyler's method, and I was like, this is very straightforward. And I actually saw how his line of reasoning was and why he thought his project was important and why he chose the method that he did. And I thought that was also really interesting, is that we get to dive into other people's methods a little bit more and see why they chose what they did. And compared to another class, I think other classes can just be applied to themselves. You know, like math classes, you're not always going to be seeing like math problems around and be like, oh, I can solve that. I feel like research can honestly just be applied to anything. So I thought that was really fun.
And by the way, everyone we mentioned more or less is going to be in the podcast later. So if you're looking for the Tyler episode, it'll be later in the season. This is just the first one. As Tyler just, I don't know if he's glaring at me or not, but yeah, we're recording this in front of a class, so it happens. What do you think the applicability is of? Because I noticed in your last response, you're talking a lot about being very critical and observant of the media that one takes in, even if it is Dancing with the Stars. What is the value of that now, at this time when probably there's more content being delivered, whether it's streaming services or anything connected to the internet is providing content for you? What do you think the value is of being able to take a critical eye to those things?
I think it's valuable because now we have so many diverse sets of media that we intake. So there's this thing on TikTok, it's called Real Shorts. So it's like short movies. So even those surface level shows, you can look into that deeply and look into how that may affect society and how that may like maybe affect our attention span. And I think you can just like look at these different shows and not just like apply them to the traditional things that we've been looking at. We can look at the new types of media we've been consuming and see how this may or may not affect people differently now. And I think that's very important because we get to see exactly what our media does to us, and that increases our awareness of things. And I think awareness is just very important.
What does media do to us?
I think media affects our perceptions of ourselves and other people around us. So what I found when I was looking through my scholarly sources is that a lot of these people looked into these different types of media because it reflected themselves. So for example, I think it was my source from Eric Haas. She was looking into Asian American stereotypes in books, I think it was. And she was an Asian American herself. So I thought a lot of these people look into the media that reflects themselves, and that helps them see how that may affect their community. So I think that's how research really helps us and helps us understand how media is so widespread and how much of an impact it really has.
Yeah, I hear you. I feel like what you're talking about, I was reading a book on identity one time. I feel like I've mentioned this in the podcast before, but it's by Florian Kuhlmann, and it's one of those Oxford very short introductions. But in the writing, the author gets into this idea of there's the identity that you assert as a person, and then there's the identity that you're ascribed by others. And the tension between those two things can make someone feel like, wait, this is who I think I am. And then all of a sudden you look at media portrayals and you're like, but all of this stuff is saying that this is who I am. And it can create some sort of internal conflict. So yeah, I see the point you're trying to make there. We only have time for one last question. So I'm going to ask, what advice would you give to other students who are maybe considering pursuing original independent research in high school?
maybe don't limit yourself to a topic, because when I tell my friends about my research topic, they're like, that's so interesting that you can research that, because everyone just thinks of research as a STEM thing. And when they see how so many AP research kids look into things going on in media, and so many of us have a humanities focus, it allows you to open yourself up to many more things. And I think don't just limit yourself to the topic that you're going to look into in STEM, because when I was in STEM, I really thought that I was going to be with the topic that I had, but I think changing my topics 3 times initially really did help me, and not limiting myself to just one aspect of research helped me see what I wanted to do. And it really helps me in this process, because it helped everything be so straightforward, and it helped me have changes, and that really helps me not have to scurry to finish everything last minute.
I think there's 2 things there. So initially what you talked about, the idea of like be open to pursuing anything, because almost anything can be looked at in an academic and structured way. But that second part there where you said you changed your topic 3 times, that's hard for people to do, especially with the sunk cost fallacy, where they're like, oh, I spent 2 months, reading sources and, checking the author's credibility, and they like sort of commit to something that they know is not working because they've invested time in it. Yeah. But that's probably the harder thing to do in what you're describing. But it's almost a skill that one needs to practice. Mm-hmm. All right. Any final thoughts before we sign off?
Maybe just enjoy your time in AP research, because it feels like so long, but it's so limited, and just feel open to explore anything.